My name is Emily Jones. I'm the president of New America Project on campus. New America Project is a progressive organization building knowledge and power on democratic socialist issues and policies through an intersectional coalition here at CMU. And thank you so much for being here. I will kind of hand it over to our moderator, Ziggy, for the night. So,
Ziggy. All right, thank you. It's a pleasure being here. Thank you, Emily. I want to point out that her group has been willing to pick this up and spearhead it, and it's always a great pleasure to see young people doing this. I have a long history here at CMU. I was a student here, started in 1972. I have 4 college degrees from the Central Michigan University, so this is my alma mater. It's always nice to come back. I was vice president of student body here when I was a young guy with long hair, and back then we had a civil rights issue. And Lyndon Johnson and others were in the process of trying to get America to think about equality. And let me just go through something real quick, just probably for the sake of understanding how we got to the point where civil rights was even something that people considered important. Started in the 1940s, when black activists wanted to have equal rights for black people. And in 1948, Harry Truman, who was the president at the time, issued an executive order 998, to end segregation in the armed services, which was a big step. The military had taken a lot of people in, inducted it for World War II, and people discovered that they could work with people from other races or other religions or whatever. That with a common cause, people could drop all those kinds of things for the sake of the country. After that, there was an incident called Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954. Supreme Court got involved and basically said that segregation in public schools was not a good thing. In 1955, Emmett Till, a 14-year-old from Chicago, was brutally murdered in Mississippi. The country was outraged. This was something that was not accepted. In December 1st, 1955, Michigan's own Rosa Parks decided she wasn't going to sit in the back of the bus. And she made a declaration that she was just as much entitled to sit on the bus anywhere she wanted as any white person, and started a national movement. January 10th, 6 black pastors and civil rights leaders gathered with Martin Luther King in Atlanta, Georgia, to form a coalition of black leaders to actually make civil rights a political issue and to do something about it in America, not to tolerate it anymore. In September 4th of 1957, the Little Rock Nine, Central High School in Arkansas, Dwight Eisenhower basically sent troops in and said, you can't stop children of black color being able to attend public schools. September 9th, 1957, Eisenhower signed the first Civil Rights Act in 1957, which basically protected voter rights. And again, something that we take for granted now. February 1st, 1960, 4 African-American college students in Greensboro, North Carolina, dared to sit at the counter of a Woolworths with white people, but they did it. The whole world watched, and it was captured, and people realized that the racism in this country was something that was brutally horrible to watch. In November 14th, 1960, a 6-year-old girl, Ruby Ridge, was escorted into school by 4 armed federal marshals so that she could go to school. It actually became a Norman Rockwell painting. And again, all of these events sensitized people to the fact that racism and civil rights violations were not acceptable, but they were before that. People just took it for granted. In 1961, the Freedom Riders drove throughout the South, and if you're in Atlanta, Georgia, go to the Civil Rights Museum, you can see the bus. They went into towns that hated the idea of civil rights and demonstrated there, basically letting people know that civil rights was something that they were willing to stand up for, even if they were spat upon or treated cruelly. In 1963, Governor George Wallace stood in the doorway of the University of Alabama to block 2 black students from going there. Now, if you know anything about the University of Alabama, they're one of the best football teams in the country, right? And if you look at their lineup, there's a lot of black players on that team now. They wouldn't be a national champion without that. Back then, however, there was not one black player on that football team. John F. Kennedy and him had a standoff. Kennedy won. Federal troops moved in. George Wallace backed down. So a powerful Southern governor was confronted and stopped from continuing the kind of segregation that was tolerated there. April 28, 1963, an iconic day, 250,000 people stream into Washington, D.C. to hear Martin Luther King talk about he has a dream. He has a dream that white people and black people can be together. And he lights up the country with that dream. September 15, 1963, a church in Birmingham is burned. 4 young girls are victims of this terrible bombing. Again, another atrocity that gets people thinking. In 1964, July 2nd, Lyndon Johnson, another president, a Southern president, signs the Civil Rights Act of 1964, preventing employment discrimination due to race, color, sex, religion, and national origin. This didn't come easy. This came in increments. He formed the EEOC Commission. February 21st, 1965, Malcolm X is assassinated. A day with a lot of controversy in this country. March 7th, 1965, Bloody Sunday, Selma, Alabama, at the bridge. 600 civil rights marchers walk to Selma and are beaten by state police troopers and by vigilantes and other people who basically deny them the right to walk down a public road. August 6, 1965, Lyndon Johnson again signs the Voting Rights Act of 1965, preventing the use of literacy tests to stop people from voting. Again, it's incremental, it's a battle, it's a struggle. It didn't come easy. April 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. is assassinated. The leader of the black movement in this country is assassinated. And this country had to stop and pause and think, what is going on here? Why are things like this happening? April 11, 1968, Lyndon Johnson again signs another Civil Rights Act. 1968, it's the Fair Housing Act. So discrimination against black people and others cannot go on, especially if there's any federal money involved. And these things were battles that were fought. And every one of these Civil Rights Acts cost the Democratic Party, the Dixiecrats, who were part of the Democratic Party, and they eventually moved over to become Republicans. If you look at the map in the next election, you'll see all these southern states vote Republican. They left the Democratic Party because Lyndon Johnson, the Democrat, stood up and said, we can't do this anymore. And in fact, he's famously quoted as saying, I've probably caused the loss of the South for the Democratic Party for at least the next 3 generations. It's actually longer than that. But again, these things are battles. Truman and others, they took it upon themselves to lead this country to the point where we are now. And today, civil rights is a very important matter. And that's why we're here tonight. We want to think about civil rights. We want to talk about civil rights. We want to capture the mood of where we are in this country today. And we have a distinguished panel here of people who are going to share with us. Each of them is going to say something specific about how they view it, where their perspective is. So we have Ron Robinson on the end, or in the middle. He's in the middle now. Ron Robinson's in the middle. He is a well-established, long-standing person who has fought for civil rights in this country. He actually works for a government agency and is responsible for civil rights adjudication here in the state of Michigan. He's not here officially representing the Attorney General, but he does work in the Attorney General's office. He's a man with a long history of battles that he's fought, and he continues to do so for all of us, for everybody in Michigan. We also have John Montgomery sitting to his right over there. John is a person who has worked in the federal government, has started a number of issues and resolved them while in the federal government. Many of them have to do with racism, and he's going to share some of that. But he's also the head of the Midland Progressives. And we also have with us Hasib Motin, who is with an organization that is a think tank, MCTV. And everybody's heard of the Mackinac Center. You know what the Mackinac Center is, the Republican think tank, Midland, Michigan, supported by the DeVos family. Well, this is the counterpart. This is the other side of the coin.
We don't have divorce money.
They don't have and Michelle Iqbal, who is with the Ezekiel Center, the Ezekiel Project out of Saginaw, Michigan. The Ezekiel Project has been fundamentally involved in all kinds of movements in Saginaw and other areas dealing with civil rights issues. She's involved with education in particular, and she's going to share some of the things that are a concern for her. We also have Jonathan Glenn, who is a member of the CMU faculty, and will probably share some of his perspective on civil rights. And so these are our distinguished members here today who are going to give you some idea about how they see civil rights, and hopefully all of us will be more enthused about this. And this is partly what Emily and others want us to do. They want us to take action. They want us to do more than sit and watch and think about this. And with that, I'm going to introduce Ron. Ron, if you would get us going, that would be wonderful. Thank you. From your perspective, what does civil rights mean to you, and what do you think is the most important issues or concerns that you deal with today in this world of ours?
I think of civil rights as a group of rights that protects an individual's freedoms against infringement from the government, organizations, and private individuals. And as far as the most significant civil rights issue, I think today is complacency. I think the right to vote is the most important civil rights that any individual can exercise. And I think that people have been persuaded that their vote doesn't count, and that's a great violation, I think.
I have been with the Attorney General's office for, it'll be 36 years in April 30th. You just remember those days, like when you birth of your first child and all those other, when you got married, of course. And so I remember when I started with the Attorney General's office. But I am here to give you my perspective of how I came to come into the civil rights arena. Of course, my perspectives, my viewpoints that I'm going to express today are my own and do not reflect those of the Attorney General Dan Nessel. But when I went to college to be a dentist. And because the most prominent African American in my community, and he was making six figures in the 70s, he was a good Catholic family, and they had 6 kids, he was a dentist. I wanted to be a dentist. I said, that's what I want to do. I want to be able to support a family of 6 and go on vacations and stuff. My parents were postal workers, so we come from humble beginnings. I'm the first attorney in my entire family. I meandered on. I went and I ended up getting a degree in sociology and a minor in religion. And at the end of my 4 years, I have to tell you, I'm a native Detroiter. I've lived in Detroit all my life except for 4 years when I went out east to school. And I can tell you, I was homesick the whole time. I got a little letter saying, you've been accepted to the class of '83 at the University of Detroit. So I said to myself, this must be fate. I can always see the forest for the trees, So I ended up going to law school, even though I hated school. Law school was very difficult for me. I was one of 8 African American students who was admitted that year. And I saw over the course of the 3 years, my numbers drop off. They had at U of D, they had a strange program they called, they had a mandatory flunk rate. I didn't really understand it when I was there, but the mandatory flunk rate meant that a certain percentage of the class must fail, you know what I mean? They don't have that at the University of Michigan. If you get into the University of Michigan Law School, you will graduate from the University of Michigan Law School. But at U of D at that time, they had a mandatory flunk rate. And they also had a program which on its face looked very welcoming and inviting. They had a bridge, what they call a bridge program. As you might imagine, a lot of the minority students were in that bridge program. So you didn't actually matriculate until you finished that program. But when you finished the matriculation, for each professor or each class you went to, you got put on the roster. You would be, since you were last to matriculate, you were on the bottom of his enrollment list. So even though it was anonymous grading, which is a great thing, if you were looking in your classroom and you saw you had 3 minority students, you could bet that they were the 3 last people on the list. Well, to make a long story short, by the time I graduated from law school, there were only three black males in the class. And I was the only one who took the bar and passed it on the first time. So I think that there was a higher power at work that it allowed me to overcome things that but anyway, I did succeed. And it gave me a passion. You can't do civil rights if you don't have empathy. You've never suffered. My first assignment was in the Civil Rights Division in 1984. It was a wonderful place to work. At that time, they had 8 lawyers. All of them were in all the law books. They were all the experts. If I was a young attorney and I needed to know something about disability law or discrimination or pregnancy discrimination law against women, I'd just go down the hall and they were all there. And they were all very helpful. So you look at that, and I stayed there. I never left. I handled some of the biggest cases that they had at my time. Were the biggest cases. They were discriminating against women. Even though they talk about equal pay now, those are some of my big cases, or equal pay for women. There was a company called Paramount Potato Chip, and they had janitors and they had janittresses. But you know what the problem was? They paid the janittresses less than they paid the men. They're doing the same job.
The big civil rights issues in my mind is that it seems to me now that certain groups are using government to take away the rights from people. Okay, like you know that people are always complaining about the Second Amendment. They're afraid the government's going to take away their guns. Women are concerned about the rights to their bodies. The rights to have an abortion if they want to have an abortion. And I am of the philosophy. I'm of the philosophy that we should leave people alone, and government should try to stay out of people's business. But it's very difficult to do, since we all know that the people are the government. So if a group of people get together and decide they want to take away your rights and pass laws to do it, it could happen. So I think that everybody needs to read up on civil rights and find out what their rights are. So just want to tell everybody that how important civil rights is, and I want to tell you a little bit about my life. I'm from Charleston, South Carolina, the cradle of the Confederacy, and I was affected by the Jim Crow laws. Okay, I had to sit at the back of the bus. I had to use bathrooms that were marked colored, and some were marked white. And I lived in a notorious ghetto called Rosemont. It's still there today. And the older men would take care of the younger boys when the parents were working. And we had an old guy named Kaiser Gale. And one of the things that he taught me in the group, he said, there's psychology, there's biology, and there's white manology. So I said, Kaiser, what is that? He said, just follow the white man. Wherever he go, you go, and you'll be okay. So anyway, I was raised by a single mother, and my mother was a very, very smart person. You got to be pretty smart to raise 8 children by yourself without a husband that left you in your 20s. And she went back to school. She got a good education. She got a college degree, and made her employer pay for it. So I thought she was pretty smart. She didn't have to take out any loans. Anyway, what I want to say is that when I was in the 3rd grade, they started something called choice, freedom of choice. You could go to any school that you want to go. So they took 10 black kids and sent them to white schools. To be honest with you, I consider myself to be a very brilliant man, and I didn't have any problems in the white schools, and went in the military. Stayed in the military for 12 years. I was a combat engineer, and had a pretty good time there. Got out of the military, couldn't find a job nowhere when I got out. But remember, I studied the whiteology. And what was the whiteology? All the jobs were in Alaska. So I got on the plane and I went to Alaska, met my wife, and I stayed there for a long time. And I, the man who studied whiteology, was a victim of racial discrimination. Every time I looked around, they were doing something to me. I knew the legal system, and I did a lot of reading, and I knew what civil rights is. And I knew that I could take and go to the EEOC, and I just started filing lawsuits. Man, I was suing them so much, man, they were tired of seeing me. And I won every lawsuit. And I became an advocate for people, white, black, green, whatever your color is. If you are discriminated against, you can call me and I will represent you.
Well, civil rights is really fundamentally protecting, legally protecting anyone regardless of their gender, their race, their sexual orientation. And the biggest attacks, honestly, is more or less, I think the best way to describe it would be the restructuring of the judicial system. We've had a consistent attack on the judiciary since, really, since the 2012, give or take. I mean, you can look at cases like 2013, Shelby County v. Holder, with gutting of the Voting Rights Act. This continuous attack, and it's not just at the Supreme Court level, it's this mentality, especially on the right these days, of appointing strict constructionists or textualism, or however you want to call it, whatever moniker you want to give it. It's this idea that the Constitution is set in stone. This document that we've had, was developed at a time where you could legally own black people, does not in any way, shape, or form need to be adapted to the modern world in any way. So this consistent attack of filling all of these federal office, the federal courts, the district courts, and the Supreme Court with these strict constructionists that might be 35, 40 years old, and creating this system where we're going to have this generational change of people that don't believe that civil rights is something that is found in the Constitution, and the only way to do it is to legislate it, and then they also then gut the legislation that does it because it's not found in the Constitution. So it's I think that's probably the biggest attack. I heard some of my fellow panelists saying education. There's many facets that are problematic today, but in my mind, the attack on the judiciary is probably the biggest one.
First of all, my name is Steve Milton. I am a board member and director of communications for MCP3, Michigan Center for Progressive Public Policy. As he said, we are a think tank based in Midland that focuses on progressive issues, civil rights, education, environment, voter rights, voter disenfranchisement, legal and not so legal methods that are being used to undermine your vote and fundamentally subvert American democracy. So, what are the methods that are used to do this? And first I'm going to cover the legal methodology that's being used today. One of the most common methods that's being used is something called common sense voter ID. How many of you guys have heard of common sense voter ID laws? Okay, you can start listening to NPR. So common sense voter ID laws. And the reason they say common sense is this has historically been being done in Republican-dominated legislatures. And they're talking about common sense saying, hey, look, there's a ton of voter fraud. We need to prevent voter fraud. We need to have people use their IDs. Everyone has an ID. But the reality is, from 2000 to 2014, there were 31 credible instances of voter fraud out of 1 billion ballots cast. Now, these are 31 investigated, proven instances of voter fraud. These are 31 credible allegations. There's a decent probability that some of these don't actually pan out. Next. So you're saying, why? Who cares? Fine, there isn't fraud, everyone has ID. Every single person has ID, you need to buy booze, you need to drive, you need whatever. As it turns out, 11% of US citizen adults don't have a government-issued photo ID. That's 21 million adults for various reasons. A lot of this is predominantly minorities, elderly, anything like that. So, but again, the question comes up, a lot of these states that do voter ID laws, they'll say, well, we made IDs free. Okay, great. IDs still cost money. Can you go to the next point? Underlying documents. Do you have your birth certificate? If you don't have your birth certificate, you need to get a copy of it. Getting that costs money. Travel expenses. There are people that live more than 150 miles away from their nearest DMV or organization that gives them a government-issued photo ID. Travel expenses, so driving there, and then the time value of money. How many of you guys work hourly jobs? Okay, think about that. If you have to drive, how many of you have spent time at a DMV? Yeah, 2 hours. Think maybe an hour back and forth. 3 hours. Even if you're making the bare minimum wage, that's about $22, $23. Realistically, based on the Brennan Center's analysis, it can cost anywhere from $75 to $175 or more for a person to get an ID, even if the ID is free, to get the underlying documents and the time value that they've lost. The impact of this is it can reduce voter turnout by 2 to 3%. Think about this as it relates to the last election, or the 2016 election. Trump won by 10,704 votes in the state of Michigan, out of 4.8 million votes. If you are suppressing votes by 2 to 3%, you have swung a presidential election. There have been elections in this country that have been decided by pulling a name out of a hat because they were ties. Which is idiotic, but it is what it is. Think of how much of an impact that has. Next one. How does this tie to civil rights? The reality is 25%, as many as 25% of African American voting age citizens have no government issued photo ID compared to 8% of their white counterparts. This is disenfranchising minority voters, poor voters, elderly voters. There is a consequence associated to this. The reality is when they talk about voter ID, when they talk about voter fraud, North Carolina in the 2018 election had 508 instances of voter fraud on 4.8 million ballots cast. Of those, 444 were felons that were voting that were ineligible to vote because they were still on parole. This is not something voter ID prevents. They had ID. They just legally weren't allowed to vote because they were felons because of that state's laws. So the reality is voter ID is a tool currently used to disenfranchise people of color, the elderly, and this is going to affect Democrats and Republicans. Over 65 generally vote. There's a higher proportion that vote Republican. It's affecting those people as well. Next slide. The other thing that's used on the legislative level to disenfranchise voters is gerrymandering. I'm sure many of you heard of this. This was on the 2018 ballot. There's the Voters Not Politician ballot. So gerrymandering is fundamentally, it's redrawing districts to favor a political party. For those of you that don't know, redrawing legislative districts. So there's a British politician that described it a great way that he said, this is not voters choosing the politicians that represent them, it's politicians choosing their voters. The 2016 election was decided by 10,704 votes out of 4.8 million ballots. In the state of Michigan, that would indicate, realistically, that we should have about a 50-50 split of Democrats and Republicans, right? We have 14 congressional districts in this state. 7 should be Democrat, 7 should be Republican, maybe 8-6. Reality is 9 of 14 are Republican. Does it matter on one state? Maybe not. But think about Ohio. 47% in Ohio voted Democrat. 25% of their legislature is Democratic. North Carolina, 48% voted Democratic. 23% of their legislature is Democratic. Something is wrong here. Something is fundamentally flawed. Now, there are 2 methods that are used to do this. Packing and cracking. Now, it's not a drug reference or anything. Packing and cracking are 2 fundamental strategies that are used. Packing, if you think about a district like this, you have 64 voters, 32 red, 32 blue. In theory, it should be 4 districts, 2 and 2, 2 Democrat, 2 Republican. If you pack, what you do is you group one group of voters together as tightly as you can. You draw the lines to jam them into one district. In theory, this could be okay. You're grouping people of interest together. You're putting all the Democrats together so they can get a Democratic person to represent them. But what you're doing is you're limiting the influence of those that are left out of that district, so they're no longer represented. You can convert this into a 3-to-1 district. The other method is cracking. It's essentially the opposite. What you're doing is you're taking Democratic vote, or you're taking one party's voters, and you're splitting them among groups strategically so you dilute their power. Both of these scenarios, you can get a 3-to-1 pretty comfortably. Real life examples of this, this is a little bit hard to see. What do you guys know about Austin politically? Which way does it lean? Austin, Texas.
Democrat.
Heavily Democrat, right? College students, entrepreneurship. It's a very heavily Democratic part of the country. Austin is represented by 6 districts. How many of those are Republican? 5. 5 out of 6 are Republican. Why is that? Well, what they did is they did a mix of packing and cracking. Let's pack all the Democratic voters that sit right around the campus together, and then crack up the rest of them and spread it all the way out into Travis County into really deep red Republican districts, and gerrymander it so those votes are diluted. So 5 out of those 6 districts are Republican. But it's not just Republicans doing this. Maryland. This is known as the broken-winged pterodactyl. This is one of the most horrible instances of gerrymandering in the country. This was done by Democrats to create a safe seat that's been safe for decades. This is a problem. Fortunately, the state of Michigan has addressed this in many ways. The 2018 ballot initiatives, Prop 2, Prop 3, one of them addressed voting rights, so allowing you to register online, allowing same-day registration, no reason to, basically excuse-free absentee balloting. So you don't have a reason not to vote. You have to do it. I know I'm preaching to the choir here. I know all of you will show up. What you have to do is take your friends. The reason I'm showing you this is I need you to go out and spread the message that this is happening, that your votes are being stolen from you, that there are states that have 3.8 times the value of their votes, or 3.8 times the value of your votes. And the only way you change that is by being engaged in it. Other legislative methods. Shutting down DMV offices in minority neighborhoods. Alabama. 34 offices were shut down in Alabama. They said it was DMV offices were shut down. This was said to control budgets. Why were they shut down in minority neighborhoods? Next slide. Reducing polling places, especially minority neighborhoods. This is a prime example of one of the things that I was telling Ziggy was one of the most dangerous things that has happened to our democracy is really the gutting of the judiciary. Not the gutting, the restructuring of the judiciary. Under Obama, many offices, the Senate refused to fill district courts. We have the Supreme Court. There are 600 district courts, if I'm not mistaken. There's 700 other federal courts that the majority of cases are decided at. Not all of them make it to the Supreme Court. Those seats were left open and filled by Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell. That gutting, the change in the Supreme Court, the conservative leaning of the Supreme Court, and this idiotic notion of textualism, of strict constructionism that Scalia abided by, that we have the mold that Mitch McConnell is trying to fill, has fundamentally restructured the judiciary for generations. These are people that are in their late 30s, early 40s that are now going to spend lifetime appointments deciding law. And a prime example of that is Shelby County v. Holder. 2013, gutted the Voting Rights Act. Under Section 5, I think it was, of the Voting Rights Act, states and counties that have historically discriminated against people of color had to get federal approval to change their voting laws. Roberts, in his majority opinion, 5-4 opinion, wrote, "These were written 40 years ago, times have changed. The data has changed. We no longer need to worry about this. These counties can figure it out." Within 5 years of that, over 1,000 polling places were removed in places like Arizona that would have fallen under jurisdiction of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. This is what is happening. The Voting Rights Act was gutted, fundamentally destroyed by these actions. 2018, the Husted case, same thing. Depriving minority precincts resources to manage voting. South Carolina, this is another legislative method. If we don't give you enough polling places, if we don't give you enough tools to manage your voters, the first one, Arizona, Maricopa County, the home of Joe Arpaio, if you guys remember him. In minority areas, they had one polling station for every 21,000 people. One polling station for every 21,000 people opens at 7 a.m., closes at 8 p.m. Try fitting all of those in. Depriving minority precincts resources to manage voting. If they don't have working voting machines, if they don't have enough volunteers filling the slots, how do people vote? Next. Purging voter rolls. North Carolina, Ohio, that's the Husted case. Purging voter rolls. So if you don't vote, this is a very critical thing for you guys to understand. Ohio law says that if you don't vote for 2 elections and they send you a postcard and you don't reply to that postcard, they can purge you from voter rolls. And since they don't have same-day registration, you are screwed if you go to vote thinking that you are registered, even though you've lived there for a decade and you think you're registered, but you maybe were sick for the last 2 elections and didn't check your mail because you're a millennial. Limiting early and absentee voting. This affects you guys disproportionately, college students. This is a travesty for you. Absentee voting, early voting are critical for people that don't necessarily live in the county all the time. And residency requirements. Many states, including Michigan, require that you be a resident for 30 days, which isn't inherently a problem, but it disproportionately affects young people that vote Democrat. These are all laws that are routinely instituted by Republicans at the moment. And then finally, discarding ballots for not exactly matching signature on file. This happened in Georgia. Thousands of ballots were discarded because their signatures did not exactly match. Think about that. My signature does not match what's on my license or on my passport. I sign like a moron. Okay, whatever. So this is a problem. This is what is being done. You need to be aware of this and you need to spread the message. Next slide, please. Voter intimidation. This is illegal, but it happens. There are laws protecting you at the polls. People should not be asking you questions at the polls. They should not be intimidating you, but this happens. These are not so legal methods that are continuously used. And the final one, misinformation. This is huge in 2020. Billions and billions of dollars are being spent on disinformation, not only from our parties in this country, but external countries are using resources to spread disinformation about our campaigns. In the 2016 elections, there was a disinformation thing going on Twitter, text your vote for Hillary. For low information voters, potentially, they thought they could text their vote to a number and have voted for Hillary Clinton and not realize that they actually had to go out and vote that day. I can vote for American Idol on my phone. Why can't I vote for president? You can't. And this potentially cost voters. Flyers with wrong dates. The Koch brothers, what's the organization? Americans for Prosperity, AFP. Sent out flyers that had the wrong date for when you could return your absentee ballot by. It was 2 days after the correct date. They said it was a typographical error. That seems oddly suspicious. These are methods that are currently being used to take your vote away from you. So you guys are the choir. Now you need to go out and sing these songs for other people and tell them the reality of what's going on. Next slide, please. So what can you do? Check if you are registered to vote. The state of Michigan, in the 2018 ballot initiative, you can scan this QR code. I promise you it doesn't put a virus on your phone. We'll take you to the website of the state of Michigan where you can check to see if you are registered to vote. If you are not, you can register via your phone if you have your driver's license with you. If you don't, go and get it. Get this done. Do it now. The other thing you can do, learn more. Visit our website. There's, in the room that we'll be going into shortly, I have documents on 2020 voting rules. There's more stuff on our website. You can donate there. Like I said, we're not funded by the DeVosses, and there aren't as many rich Democrats that are just willing to throw dark money around. So visit our website, learn more about us, and fundamentally tell people. You need to tell people. And you need to spread the message among your friends.
Civil rights to me is essentially those rights that are upheld and guaranteed by the government. What's the greatest challenge? I would say education. The state of public education in the state of Michigan is truly dismal when you think about how our money is being spent, where the money goes. Are students the ones who see the investment in their schools, or does it go to administration? Of course, it's not the fault of parents or teachers or students, but at the end of the day, what is the education that we're providing for our students? When it comes to civil rights, public education is a right, but what is the quality of that education that we're giving our students in our future?
I actually want to play a game before we get started with the meat portion of my talk, but I need full audience participation because games aren't fun if only half you play, okay? Can we all collectively play the game with me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. If you played this game before, don't ruin it, okay? Those are the rules, basically. All right, so it's a call and response. So I'm going to ask a question, everyone answers, okay? Awesome. So when a comedian is on stage, what do they tell? Jokes. Awesome, nice. What do you call the things inside of a bicycle wheel?
Spokes.
When you puff on a cigarette, what comes out?
Smoke.
What do you call the white part of an egg?
Yolk.
It's called the white. The white part of an egg is called the white. So, what just happened? I'm sure all of y'all know that the white part of an egg is called the white, right? No one thinks that the white part of the egg is called the yellow part, right? Great. What just happened here is what's known as implicit bias. What just happened here is I primed you to think a certain way to influence the way you act, the way you make decisions. Like I said already, you all know what the yellow part of an egg is called, and yet because of some subliminal messaging that I threw in with some humor and a little game, I was able to influence what your response would be and have you override your intelligence and go straight in with the game of like, oh yeah, joke, spoke, etc. It's fun in a game, but it has serious consequences for real life. If you have been told your entire life, when you see a big guy who's black walking towards you on the sidewalk, what do? You cross the road, you go to the other side. When you see a man at night and you're in your car and you're alone, what do? Lock those doors, roll up your windows. Did anyone tell you that you should be afraid of men? Did anyone tell you you should be afraid of people of color or black men in particular? No, but what have you been told your entire life? Be careful, be safe, you don't know these people are out to get you. You're not being told that these people are bad, but you're being primed to believe that way. Does that make sense? This isn't a laughing matter, but essentially the point is, implicit bias, although in this scenario it was very minor, has very serious consequences for the way that we live our lives. So outside of my work with the Ziggy project, I'm an educator. I lecture at Wayne State University. I teach an intro public health class. When we talk about civil rights, we're talking about access. And education is a right that no one can take away from you. A person who is a slave is a person who's not educated. Because a person who has an education cannot be a slave because he knows what's happening to him. When we talk about the state of public education in this state, in this country, we're looking at something utterly embarrassing. Out of some dystopian novel of like the demise of civilization. The work that I'm working on is to try to ensure full and fair funding, equitable funding for Michigan public schools. The Ziggy Project is a faith-based nonprofit organization, and we believe strongly that by providing full, fair funding for our schools, for our infrastructure, we can right the wrongs of lack of access to a good quality of education. Imagine if the high schools that you went to didn't give you the opportunities that brought you here. Would you be able to be in this room? Would you be able to go on to, law school, dental school, medical school, a trade, theater, whatever? Probably not. When you're a child, you rely on those older than you to provide you with things. One of my mentors once told me something that I really want to share with you. He told me that people like to say that our children are at risk. We have at-risk youth. And he told me that that's not correct. That's wrong. When you look at the circumstances that our children are in, they did not create those circumstances. They did not go out and make guns, buy guns. They're not the ones who created this music that old people like to call garbage. They did not create environments where the only place they feel safe is with their friends doing XYZ thing that's not okay. These children are not at risk, they are in risk because the environments that adults like us have created. Well, maybe not us, maybe them, but
The fact of the matter is, like Hasib was saying, your vote matters. My answer to Dr. Ziggy's question of what is the biggest enemy towards civil rights is our complacency as Americans. We all believe that at some level our government is going to help us. We all believe that regardless of what happens, we're going to be okay because this is America. But the fact of the matter is, we have to do something. If you are someone who feels comfortable not voting because you know that your guy's going to win, come on. Or if you feel like you're someone who doesn't have to vote because your vote doesn't matter, these are all lies. These are all primers that have been put out into the world to affect you, to make you not vote. This is the implicit bias at work. Our students are at risk. No, sorry. Our students are at risk of continuing to being in risk in a system that they didn't create. They didn't do anything to deserve the education system that they're getting. It's not the fault of the parents, it's not the fault of the teachers, it's not the fault of the students, it's just a system that exists that needs to be corrected. Through your votes, through your influence of talking to your peers, we can make a change. The people who pay the most of their income in taxes are the people who make the least among us. Whereas the people who make the most in Michigan pay the lowest fraction of their income in income taxes. And I can show you that information here. The fact of the matter is, the wrong people are being blamed for problems that they didn't create. And by creating a fair and equitable system of funding public education, we can make it so that we have businesses back in Michigan, we have a workforce that's highly educated, we have cities that are invigorated with people who want to not only move to Michigan to start their families, but move back to Michigan from going wherever they went to school and staying here and rebuilding our infrastructure and our economy. Investing in our students is investment in our future. You all know this. High school wasn't that long ago. You know how hard your teachers work. They need you now, especially now that you're 18, to help them, help their students, help the next generation. That's my time. Thank you.
To the guests on the stage, welcome to CMU, and to all of those who are coming from your different cities, we welcome you to Mount Pleasant. Once again, my name is Jonathan Glenn. I am a two-time graduate from Central Michigan University. 2002, 2006, I was here, got my teaching degree, taught middle school for a while, came back, got my master's in history, where I was able to teach Native American history here for 3 semesters, and now I'm in my first year of my doc program here with the focus of mentorship. One of the goals for my doctorate study is to study the significance of mentorship for students of color who attend a PWI. Because it is my goal to assist students, and I do believe that mentorship is that caveat that you can use to help students get to the place where they need to be. Let me start this way. Being a Saginaw product myself, I do understand what it takes to come to a PWI at Central Michigan University and shoot for the stars, shoot for success, and run alongside your peers who may or may not look like you. That's not always the easiest thing, but I want to say this to you. A song that we grew up singing in the Black community is the Black National Anthem, and at the end of the stanza that we usually sing, it says, "Let us march on until victory is won." So I always took that to the thought process that if victory isn't won, that means that we should do all that we can to keep on marching towards it. And in the essence of that song, I truly don't believe it's just students of color who has to continue to march down the way to victory. It's people who look like you that's in this room tonight. Now, most of the time when privilege is pushed to the negative end of itself, and the essence of it, is because those with privilege choose not to speak up for those without. Even in the civil rights movement of the 60s and slide into the 70s, there were non-people of color who assisted people of color to get to the place where they need to be. Now, I'm not saying that those on this stage, who consider themselves students of color or people of color, like yourself if you're in the room, that we can't get to where we are without whites. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying it takes unity. I don't care what your identity is. You may not be a black man, a Christian man like myself. I'm still fighting for you. Because that's what civil rights demands. It's not just a skin color issue. Identities have surpassed that in 2020. So the problem is, can you arrive and be a fight for someone who don't look like you? Because if you can't, again, we have a problem. So yes, I work in leadership, but it doesn't matter. I don't care if you're in Greek life. I don't care what side of the tracks you're from. If you're here at Central Michigan University, I'm fighting for your right to survive. I'm fighting for your right to have food. I'm fighting for your right to get into med school. I'm fighting for your right to get scholarships. I'm fighting for your right, not just because I'm a black man. It's because Central Michigan, we believe in community and family, and this is what we do. We need you to change the future. My son is 8, my daughter is 6. You would lead them into the next years, and I need that. I need their civil rights to be even better than mine, even better than my mom, and even better than my grandfather. Civil rights has worked, or I wouldn't be able to speak to you tonight. I wouldn't be able to have married the woman of my dreams because she's of a different race. Thank you so much for having me, but we want to also thank you for being here, to everyone on this stage.